This is a WKYT podcast.
Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. And today we have the opportunity to hear from United Nations Ambassador and Kentucky native Kelly Craft. Ambassador Craft brought members of the UN Security Council to the Commonwealth last weekend. The diplomats from around the globe had a chance to talk issues in a friendly Kentucky setting. Before being chosen by President Trump as UN ambassador from the United States, Craft was the U.S. ambassador to Canada. Ambassador Craft was an alternate delegate to the UN under former President George W. Bush. And locally, she served on the board of her alma mater, the University of Kentucky. Craft is married to co-executive Joe Craft, and she's a big UK fan, by the way, and we want to welcome Ambassador Craft with us. Thanks for coming. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Bill, for having me. This is such an honor to be here, especially to be home on a Monday. So
and it must you must feel right at home, certainly at a time like this. What is the experience like for you to serve the United States in this very important and highly visible position? Given that you're from Kentucky, your roots are from here, how does that shape you and in your view of the world?
I think growing up in a small town, I was born in Lexington, but Glasgow, Kentucky is my home. That's where I was brought up. And I think that's vitally important because being brought up on a farm, my father was a veterinarian and we had a working farm, really instilled the values that many hands make light work. And I think the Security Council, we all are so engaged in order to make our work lighter and more efficient. My dad taught me the values that every living, breathing, everything matters. And therefore, I learned how to value the land, how to value a farmer's long, hard day at work, and also to value your obligation to serve, whether it be serve your community of Glasgow, Barron County, or serve the state of Kentucky, and or serve a higher calling, which is our nation.
How did the visits go last weekend when you brought diplomats from around the world to your old Kentucky home?
Well, it was something that I've been thinking about for 2 months. I have been at the UN 3 months as of December the 11th. So I came right into the high-level week of the General Assembly, and the Security Council presidency, the U.S. presidency, was in December. So you rotate this every 15 months because there's 15 members of the Security Council. So it was a very important decision because when you bring people to your home, I look at bringing the Security Council to Kentucky as a very intimate gathering because this is my home. And I'm opening up my friends, my family, which is the state of Kentucky, to the people that they know the least. So we made the decision based upon the fact that Kentucky is a state that was a farming community and is taking farming to a different level with more of an agribusiness and with a lot of private-public partnership. I wanted them to see that we are on a global scale with whether it be horses, bourbon, Alltech, which is one of the companies that we visited, because I wanted them to understand the Alltech, the Lions family, has committed to 9 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals at the UN. And I just wanted them to show my home so they can understand better my values and what I bring to the Security Council.
And what were some of the topics you discussed while you were here in this placid setting of Kentucky and the Bluegrass region?
Well, we discussed a lot about private-public partnership. I wanted them to understand that the bourbon industry is global. It's all over the world. That with Alltech, I had J.D. Vance come in, the author of Hillbilly Elegy, Jonathan Webb with App Harvest, obviously Mark Lyons, who is, their Alltech is feeding the world, and they are partnering with organizations all over the world. And also Scott Jennings was there, so he was fun because they couldn't get over that Scott, being a conservative, yet is on CNN, so that was kind of a lot of fun for the Security Council. But I think it was really important that they see that we are a state that we care about our people, and we also care about helping really be part of the world, be engaged in the world. And whether it be through App Harvest with Jonathan Webb with his indoor farming, or whether it be with Alltech with feeding the world, basically, and also livestock. And I think it was just very important for them to see that this is not just a state in the United States, because a lot of them thought we were in the Midwest. So I said, no, we're more of the Southern, and they really got to feel a Southern hospitality.
Ambassador, how important, given the perspective that you have now, how important is the United Nations to world stability?
The UN, for some countries, is the only global stage that they have in order to voice their needs, in order to voice their hopes and their aspirations. And I find that the UN is vital, because the U.S., whether the UN is located in New York or abroad, we are the #1 donor, just like we are with NATO. And it's very important that the countries understand that we are a country that we're very giving. We're always the first in and the last to leave. We also care about transparency. We are a country that cares about our taxpayers' dollars, and that's one of the reasons that the President sent me, is because he knew that I would be watching after our taxpayers, as he is a businessman, and we understand business, and that you have to have accountability and also efficiency. And I think that's where the UN plays an important role, is that the U.S. is allowed to really showcase what we can do for the other 192 member states.
There are always hot spots in the world, and North Korea is one of those, certainly right now, and they've done more nuclear testing and pushed back when the United States criticized them for doing more testing. What is our stance?
Well, we don't have a deadline, and we are very hopeful that they will keep with their commitment in the denuclearization, and also with not launching any of their missiles. And it doesn't matter whether they're short-term missiles or long-term. It is the fact that we would like to have peace on the Korean Peninsula. And in order to have peace, everyone needs to know that there's not going to be a threat. And I think that's what's really important, and we want to work with them. And we will use every tool possible in order to have negotiations and to be able to continue this dialogue with Chairman Kim.
In the Mideast, Iran, we have issues that we're very concerned about there as we watch as Americans.
Well, for everyone to know that Iran, they are bad actors. And we have not seen any change in their behavior. I mean, just this past couple weeks, we've seen where Iran basically, they have been killing their youth. I mean, these are protesters that would like to have democracy, would like to have a freedom of speech, and to be able to protest peacefully. And they are not allowing this in Iran. Iran has caused major issues in Yemen. We have the biggest humanitarian disaster there, because Iran, they prop up the Houthi rebels, which are the rebels that do not allow for access, for aid, for the World Food Program to come into Yemen. They have propped up the Assad regime in Syria. And through Syria, Iran sends their weapons to Hezbollah in Lebanon. So they are bad actors everywhere in the world. And most importantly, we want to promote youth no matter where they are, whether it's Iran, Iraq, Yemen, the United States. Everybody needs to have a voice, and they need to have the opportunity to speak for freedom. And we have the same situation in Iraq, with government going against the youth that are just asking for a better life.
The timing of all of this, including these visits to Kentucky, and then as we're in the holiday period here in the United States, it comes during this impending impeachment vote in the U.S. House. Are other diplomats around the world paying close attention to the internal situation in the United States, and is that a distraction for you?
I will say, I just got back from Colombia, and being in Colombia and seeing all of the refugees that are coming across the border in Venezuela, and speaking to people, the first thing they say is, Americans are here. The Security Council arrived, and it gave everybody great hope. But more importantly is when I would speak to people, we give them hope. They're not concerned about impeachment. They don't even know about impeachment. What they do know is that Donald Trump cares about the regular person. Those are the people that elected him in the United States. Those are the people that, when I'm abroad, when I'm in South Sudan or in Bogota, Colombia, those are the people that are in need, the refugees, and they know that we care. And that's what we're focused on, is making certain that we take care of those that have less.
To what extent do you have to pay attention to such things as the Brexit deal going on in Great Britain and the questions about the way forward there.
Well, I think with Brexit, with Ambassador Pierce, who is here, we just are very supportive of the ambassador. She's the ambassador of the United Kingdom to the United Nations, and obviously Great Britain or the United Kingdom is one of the P5 of the Security Council, which is the veto, the permanent 5. We're just very supportive of Ambassador Pierce and her issues with Brexit and with the newly elected re-elected Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
How do you approach climate change, which many scientists and UN members say needs very urgent attention, that in fact at this point we are behind the ball on trying to deal with that? I know you've said that you're for countries to do their individual parts to address climate change. What is the United States' role?
Well, you know, I disagree that we are not behind, because I think that the U.S., we don't have to be part of an agreement or a treaty to be active and actively engaged within, whether it be climate change or any negotiation or any treaty for that matter. But the U.S. has been very successful in curbing our emissions. What I like to focus on is the innovation and technology that we as Americans are developing around the world to help with combating climate change. I think that's what's really important, and we have some of the smartest, brightest young students in the world that are in the United States, that are Americans, that are also developing new technologies to curb carbon emissions.
Given the United States situation as the leader in the world, do we have a responsibility to go first on these things, or do you want other countries to come along at the same time in the approach to that issue?
Well, I think within any area of giving, we are always the largest donor, and if you're speaking about the climate change,
yes,
with the Paris Agreement, we don't necessarily see being part of that group in order to make a difference with sustainability. We try to balance our economy and also our environment, and I think that's what's really important. And we have made strides. Like I said, we are in Africa. We are helping them with technology. We are helping countries to keep them sustainable, and we want to leave a community, and we want to leave them with lessons learned on how to better stabilize their community so that we don't have to be there full time, that they can implement and employ their own people.
You've talked some about human rights, and during your confirmation you promised to tackle human rights abuses every day. How are you following through on that pledge, or how do you plan to?
Well, you know, we just had Human Rights Day at the United Nations, and I stress to everyone, every day is Human Rights Day. And depending on the country, it's case by case as to the issues. We focus on the peacekeeping troops that are there in order to keep peace in that particular country, and they are keeping an eye and making certain that the rights of the people that they're protecting are not abused. And it is a real issue around the world. You know, the U.S. we withdrew from the Human Rights Council for a reason. There are countries that are engaged in the Human Rights Council that are the very abusers themselves. So we are very much engaged daily on combating human rights, whether it be human trafficking, human rights, any issue where an individual's rights are abused.
You talked about, and we talked about, your devotion continues to the Kentucky Wildcats, and I know certainly during your visit here, you want to just take a moment and honor John Walls, who's had a profound loss.
Yeah, John Wall's mother, Frances Pulley, passed away just this week, and when Coach Cal asked me to do the why, I said, you know, I'm going to do this in memory of Frances Pulley, and it meant so much to me to know that I know she was watching, and John, it was such an intricate part of the university, and he continues to give back to Kentucky, as we all know. And I think that it's really important for people to reach out to John and to show their condolences about his mother. And then, you know, just to be at Kentucky, this is where I graduated from, and to be able to bring the Security Council, and I must say I really prayed hard for a win. So they had a great time. I don't know who was more excited, the council to see Coach Cal or Coach Cal to see the council. So it was a win-win for everyone.
What do you want to be said about your tenure as United States Ambassador to the United Nations?
You know, I feel like that I was appointed for such a time as this. I care about people. I look for the next right thing. And I want people to know that I'm a bridge builder between countries, and that when you're speaking to a country, whether it be Russia and China on the Security Council, you look to them first as where is their culture? They're speaking to their capital. I want to negotiate and build friendships based upon who you are and where you came from.
Have you put other countries on notice, don't mess around with our 2020 election here?
You know, I don't think we have to put them on notice. I think that everyone understands the freedom of expression, the right to vote. And in the Security Council, it's really not an issue. We are all there to work together. We're all there to promote one another. And most importantly, the Council's there to maintain peace and security around the world. And that's what we're all focused on.
Ambassador Kraft, thank you for coming by.
My pleasure.
Really do
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Thank
you very much for having me.
And stay with us. We'll be back on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. We welcome you back to Kentucky Newsmakers on WKYT. Recently re-elected State Auditor Mike Harmon released the results of 2 audits this week. One looked at how spending for the KentuckyWired broadband project has ballooned out of control. Another, a special examination of Kentucky child support enforcement. Auditor Harmon has also recently looked at several local governments to see how they're taking care of tax dollars that flow through. Auditor Harmon campaigned on the slogan, "Follow the data," and he says he does that without regard to political affiliation or geography. Auditor Harmon, welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers. Thanks for coming.
Well, glad to be here. Good morning. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing fine.
And Merry Christmas.
And same to you, sir.
Yes.
It was a noble idea to get broadband to every section of Kentucky
Very
and
much
available. But the Kentucky Wired project has been more expensive and has taken longer than anyone envisioned. The audit you released this week may give us some details as to why.
Yeah, this was phase 2. We had released phase 1 a while back. In that one, we kind of detailed the fact that basically on the way out the door, the previous Governor Beshear flipped the script on the Kentucky taxpayers and took us from about a $30 million investment to a $1.5 billion investment. But what we wanted to do in phase 2 was to kind of dig down more and find out why that happened. Why did they flip the script? And, you know, we looked from a standpoint of the fact that from the original RFP, which was supposed to be a public-private partnership before we'd even had public-private partnerships, basically more of the burden, or at least some of the shared burden, being on the private company. So after that RFP, which was July of 2014, it was awarded, and then there was negotiations, and there was a master agreement signed in December of 2014.
And that was a pretty straightforward.
Few changes from the RFP, but not as many as you might think.
But as time went on, change after change, right?
Yeah, well, between the master agreement and the project agreement, it shifted dramatically. And oddly enough, between that master agreement and the project agreement, the buyer that was involved between the RFP and the master agreement was not involved for those additional negotiations that led to the project agreement. And not only did it shift far away from the RFP, putting almost all of the burden and risk on the state, you know, from a standpoint, it didn't even want to codify the RFP. It superseded the RFP, which was very odd and strange.
What are we talking about that was going on that has cost so much money? They had to get rights of ways. They had to go and actually put equipment on poles.
Yeah.
That's where
it's multiple. It's multiple. And one, oddly enough, they had received multiple warnings. They even paid. They spent over $1.3 million to get advice from attorneys and engineers, and those engineers told us the way that they were going was going to be very costly and the burden on the state. But there was multiple. They took on the risk of pole attachments. They also took on the risk of financing. You know, one of the things that Macquarie was supposed to do was obtain private financing that, for lack of a better word, didn't put the hook into the state bonds rating. Well, that all changed. And so the biggest problem that we've faced is that, you know, there are technically still provisions where we can withdraw from it, but now that the bonds are tied to our credit, if we do, then it's going to greatly impact our credit rating.
Well, the last time you were here, you indicated that Kentucky's too far into this project to back out at this point.
It's very difficult.
Too much money into it. Where do we go from here?
Well, it is my understanding that 2 lines are active, and obviously my understanding is they're going to be still several years away from being profitable. So now it's it's really up to those that are wanting it to continue and the General Assembly, because they're still going to have, the General Assembly is still going to have to make, if they choose, because the bond, if they choose to make those availability payments, which it's just basically you're continuing to feed it. If we don't learn anything else from this bill, we need to learn that going forward, we need to have a much more oversight on these type of projects. We need to stay more consistent with the RFP. The General Assembly may even want to consider reining in some of the power of the Finance Administration Cabinet Secretary, because basically all this was done with the signature. We even made, there were multiple 407 modification attachments to the original contract that many of them were just recently put in this year.
So this agreement really ballooned over 2 administrations, right?
The biggest flipping of the script occurred in the previous first Governor Beshear administration. There were additional adjustments as Governor Bevin and his staff were trying to negotiate settlements to minimize, they still spent like $110 million, give or take, trying to minimize the damage with the pole attachments and what they called supervening events. But yes, there were adjustments made even during Bevin's administration.
If the legislature continues to fund this, will KentuckyWired become reality?
That is difficult for me to say. From a standpoint, there are, obviously still concerns. There are many people that still want to come finish up, and certainly I think it was good for them to do it, and I certainly think if they can bring it to conclusion, it would be great as well. But either way, it's going to be an additional burden on the state no matter which path that they take.
Are there ongoing costs after it's completed that the state would incur?
There is. Some of the things that they took on between that RFP and the master agreement and the project agreement were not only they took on not only the risk of the pole attachments at a very aggressive rate, they also took on the responsibility of refreshing it. In other words, bringing it up to date. Technology transfers, or upgrades so quickly. So they've done that. Plus, those availability payments is really the big driver of all this on the bonds.
State Auditor Mike Harmon is with us on Kentucky Newsmakers. We'll ask him about another audit recently released and what else he's looking for. What's his agenda for the next 4 years? We're back in a moment. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers. Glad you're here as we're now leading up to Christmas in the Commonwealth. We're with State Auditor Mike Harmon now and continuing our discussion. Auditor, you have done a special examination of the Child Support Enforcement Branch of the Cabinet for Families and Children. There was an indictment that resulted from that one.
That is yes. When we first started this, Commissioner Brian Hubbard asked us to go in and take a look. We made a decision to go in and look at some of the child support enforcements. And one of the things we did is we randomly selected about 8 county attorneys, and it was really odd, Bill. Just the fact that we went in and started shining some of the light, the office manager came forth and informed the local county attorney, the Boyd County attorney, that she had basically been misappropriating some funds. And so he contacted us as well as the state police, and that has led to an indictment. They are indicting her on as much as I think $113,000 that they are saying that she has taken. And so it just goes to show you just shine a little sunlight and people start to want to make sure that they do what's right.
What have other recent audits turned up? I know you look at county governments with regularity.
We do. I mean, a while back we had talked about the standpoint of the former Jackson County treasurer, who had written herself, depending on whose numbers you look at, anywhere between $120,000 to $160,000. About half of those through federal funds, about half of those through state funds. So we have multiple. A lot of stuff we do on the day-to-day, the statutorily requirements. Some of the stuff is just not being compliant with the laws, not necessarily theft, but we do have some, just like the former Jackson County treasurer and this one.
Are you sometimes surprised by how simple these schemes are? Somebody's just writing themselves a check?
Well, yes. From our standpoint, of course, it's odd that this one went on so long, and that was part of what we talked about, that if they had better checks and balances, because they weren't actually confirming whether or not these checks were being deposited in the proper accounts. But yes, it is interesting sometimes how that works out.
In your office and in your campaigns, you've used the slogan "Follow the Data." How can people let you know, or what is it that you need to know from the public that might be helpful to your office?
Sure. Anytime you have a tip of waste, fraud, or abuse, you can obviously go to our hotline, 1-800-KY-ALERT, give us a call, or you can go to auditor.ky.gov, and we have a tips line that they can provide us tips. And we have someone that assesses those tips, reviews surface, and then from the standpoint, if we believe that they are valid, we can get those. If there's an auditor in the field, whether it's our auditor or a CPA, we can get that to them, or sometimes the tips rise to a special exam.
About a minute. Performance audits are designed to determine if programs are doing what the General Assembly appropriated the money for them to do.
Right.
You're always looking at those programs, right?
Yeah, what we typically do, we don't do a lot now of what people would consider performance audits. What we do a lot is special exams. And sometimes during those special exams, we will look and see if the money is being spent wisely, efficiently, and if they are compliant with the law.
Thanks for coming by.
Glad to be here.
All right, thank you, State Auditor Mike Harmon. We want to thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. A reminder, of course, we'll have all the latest for you throughout this week to come, Christmas week in Kentucky, on WKYT News and on WKYT.com. That is Kentucky Newsmakers. Make it a good week ahead.